Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Great. Well, welcome everybody to the Nashville Modern Excel and Power BI user group. If this is your first time, welcome. Thanks for joining us. We've been a in-person user group for probably 5 years now, and we're getting used to the virtual. But we've been following Power Query, Power Pivot, and some of the tools that were added to Excel since the beginning. And then as Power BI became a thing, we've been featuring that in our user group presentations each month. And we've also started to branch out and highlight some of the Power Platform in general as well. But so our group's just about these Power tools. And our agenda for today, of course, I hope you got lunch because it is lunchtime, and feel free to eat. But of course, be muted and turn your camera off when you do. But we would love for you to participate in the presentation today. Megan, who's presenting, said she'd love for it to be interactive. So please do, when you're not eating, turn your video on and unmute yourself if you want to have a question, or we'll give you a way to chat as well if you just want to ask a question in the chat. But we would invite you to be participatory today. We'll go through a couple of announcements and talk about what's new in Excel and Power BI, and then we'll turn it over to Megan to show us some practical storytelling techniques in Power BI, which should be super interesting. And then if you guys want to hang out for a little bit afterward, you're welcome to. Of course, virtual, we can do that as long as you guys are able, but we realize it's a work day, so we'll try to be done by 1 for you guys who need to get back to work. So as Michael noted in our last month's meeting, usually we would highlight some in-person events like SQL Saturdays in the area that are coming up, but there's not a lot of that going on. So I don't have a lot to highlight, but I did notice Microsoft put together an events catalog, and it's pretty much has virtual stuff, but it's worth checking out, and it's at events.microsoft.com, and you can kind of pick the tool. So I could pick Power BI, and you'll see different events that are upcoming, and they're all online or on demand basically. But I did notice there's a Modern Excel Analyst in a Day by Power Pivot Pro, which could be interested for those of you Excel Power users out there. And there's also some Dashboard in a Days. Journey Team's actually in Nashville, so you could do an online meeting with people close by. But these types of meetings could kind of be a hands-on learn about using the Power tools in Excel or in Power BI, kind of get you ramped up. So I thought I'd highlight that. There might be some other events that show up in this catalog, but check that out. Oops. We also have our upcoming meetings. So next month we've got Bill Anton, who's an independent consultant who's been in this space for a while and has a lot of good things to say, out of Atlanta. And he's going to be talking about time intelligence in Power BI. So he'll give you some good patterns to apply in your decks with your data that I think will be pretty applicable. So that's already posted on our meetup site, so you can RSVP today, right now if you want to, if you don't want to try to remember. And then in March, we've got Matthew Roche, who's on the Microsoft Power BI team, and he's going to talk about building a data culture with Power BI in March. And that is also posted so you can sign up for that today as well. What's new? So first we'll start with what's new in Excel. So if you have the Office 365 version of Excel, they are updating it monthly. And your organization might set different times that new features come out. And I got to get the Zoom thing out of my way here. So let's see here. So there were 2 new updates in Excel. For some reason, I did have it pulled up, but I guess, oh, here it is, November updates. So in November, they added the ability to hide multiple sheets at once. So there's a nice feature. You could just shift click and hide multiple sheets at once. And the other thing they added, which I was going to do a little demo of, is allowing you to add custom data types with Power Query. So for my little demo here, I found, just looked on Wikipedia for a list of cities in Europe. I'm going to grab this URL and go over to Power Query and connect Power Query to this table and bring in the data. So before I do that, I just want to talk about what the Excel data types are. I think we've highlighted this before, but those of you who are new or haven't seen this, it's on the data tab, and you've got a few that are in there already. And these are, I think this is worth paying attention to, because they're doing a lot of cool things with it, including being able to get your company's Power BI data into Excel. It would show up here under an organizational type. I don't have any set up to show you, but I can show you the built-in one. So if I were to type in MSFT, which is Microsoft's stock ticker, and I click on the stock data type, it'll try to match this with a stock, and of course it found the NASDAQ Microsoft. So basically, this is kind of tied to live data out there in the world. And if I click on the little icon here, it'll pull up live information. So I can see I have the company's logo, the stock price, and just all sorts of information, a description of the company, how many employees, where it's located. This is what a data type is in Excel, and I can reference it. So I could say dot, and I can grab any of those pieces of data, like the price, and I can put it in a cell, and I can do math on top of it in Excel. So let me show you. So you can do that with your Power BI data sets, with stocks or locations that Microsoft has kind of set up already. But you can also create your own with Power Query. So that's kind of what I wanted to show you today. So I'm going to do this real quick. So I'm going to connect to that web page. And it found that table that we saw on the web. So I'm going to transform it. And then I am going to do a little cleanup here. I was hoping to get the image, but perhaps, do I need to change it to a binary? I didn't do this demo completely before, so I'm just going to do a quick, we'll see if that works. And so what I do now is, if I control click on fields, I can kind of collapse them into that data type. So I'll do city, country, population, date, image, and location. And then if I go over to the transform tab, get zoom out of my way, you'll see this create data type icon up here. And so when I click on that, it will let me give it a name. I'll call it cities. And so you can see it kind of created this column with the name of the city. And so I'm just going to load just that column. So I'm going to load this back into Excel. So now I've got my Power Query data, but it's got this icon, and I can get the card, and I can also do the same thing I could do with the other one, where I could add official population. So it's a way you could, if you had like a report you were doing with Power Query, you could kind of nest some details that they might not want to see, but if they were interested in a row, they could kind of get to it really quickly. So I thought that was pretty cool and worth. When I heard it, I didn't know what it was, and it didn't ring a bell with me. So I thought a quick demo might help you guys understand what that meant as well. So that's Excel. In Power BI Desktop, I apologize for the blurriness of this slide, but these are some of the monthly updates. And as always, Microsoft on their blog puts out a video covering the monthly update. So I'll point you there if you want to know more about these. They put a good video together walking through all of them. But I do want to highlight the direct query for Power BI data sets and Azure Analysis Services. So this is in preview, but I think it's something exciting that's coming. And what it is it brings together corporate BI and self-service BI. So your IT department or your company might publish some official Power BI data sets in Power BI or in Azure Analysis Services. And an analyst can take the data that they have and kind of bring in the official model with its relationships and automatic data refreshing and everything. And then they can also bring in their own data set and kind of relate them together and build their own model. So I haven't tried it yet, but it sounds pretty exciting and is a big step towards corporate BI and self-service BI working together. Another one that is exciting is small multiples. So that's a new visual type. And I just wanted to quickly show over here just a visual of it. So the way small multiples works is you basically take any one of the visualizations and you add a grouping to it. So this would be a line chart, and somebody dragged a category field in, like a category of product, and then it created a line chart for every one of those categories. So you could do the same thing. Here's an example with a bar chart, breaking it out by country. So it's a neat way to kind of see a chart across different categories all at once. There are several limitations to it right now. I imagine this is a hard thing to program to make it interactive and with all the features that Power BI visuals have. So it's in preview and there are some limitations, and they're planning on resolving some of those. But you can check out the blog. They have a whole write-up on the blog about small multiples. But that is exciting, and wanted to highlight that today. Just a quick tour of the Power Platform. So if you're not familiar, if you've heard of Power BI and that's why you're here, that's great. But we also try to highlight some of the other products Microsoft has come out with. So Power BI makes reporting and creating interactive dashboards easy, but retains the power. So you still have a lot of capabilities. And so Microsoft has created these other products that kind of carry that metaphor of making it easier, but also retaining the power of the features into app development and mobile app development with Power Apps. And then Power Automate is, I used to say it was kind of like a back-end programmer that was working with APIs, but they've added robotic process automation to it that actually automates desktop. So where there's not an API, they have solutions to automate manual processes there as well, and also bring a lot of AI into that automation. But again, they're making it easy, but giving you a lot of capabilities. And then Power Virtual Agents lets you create a chatbot in a low code, easy sort of way. So that's the Power Platform. And we usually try to quickly highlight what's happening in these spaces as well each month. So again, here's just a slide. The Power Platform is for every developer, and it's low code. And then you've got these Azure things that kind of falls into the pro developer that has a code first experience using Visual Studio or something along those lines. So in the Power BI service, some of the things that they added this month, I do want to quickly show you this top one, just because I didn't know what it meant when I read the headline. But they added the ability to quickly create reports in the Power BI service. And I'm going to just quickly take my data here that I created, and I'm going to go over to Power BI. And you'll notice here that they've added this little plus button. And so if I click create, it will give me the opportunity to paste data in. So I'm in the browser, by the way. Or you could pick an existing data set, but I'm going to paste my data set in that I just made in Excel. And I'm going to use the first row as my headers, and I'll just format the text. So this is kind of like a super trimmed down Power Query experience here. And then I'll just create. And of course, you'd probably have a more interesting data set than this if you were to do this. But just to quickly show you. So it's going to automatically create a report for you. So if you have more fields, it will create more charts. But it basically gave me a bar chart, and I can see the detail table. Of course, this isn't that exciting. But you can see the population across all cities, filtered to a city. So I think that's really cool if you just want to do something ad hoc, quickly create a report. And of course, I can edit this. They just threw these charts on here for me, but I can drag and drop fields and manipulate it. So anyway, I thought that was worth explaining. Other things that are related to the Power BI service. This is actually a Power Automate feature, but it is about data flows, so I thought I'd put it in this section. So there's a trigger in a Power Automate flow where you can find out when a data flow finishes. So if you've worked with data flows, you know that it puts a data set in the cloud, but your Power BI data model is separate from it. And if it's refreshing, it's using the data flow as a source, you want it to happen after the data flow runs. So now with Power Automate, you can kind of accomplish that. So when the data flow finishes, kick off the refresh of my Power BI data set. So that's in preview. And then there is the ability to attach a full PDF or PowerPoint of your Power BI report in a premium workspace. And so if your company doesn't have premium, this would not apply to you. But I wanted to mention as well that they have a preview of Power BI Premium per user, which the pricing's not out, but I think it may be a way for small to medium-sized businesses to use those premium features. And they put out a new frequently asked questions. If you are curious about trying that preview or learning about Power BI Premium per user, I'll put that link in the chat when I'm done talking. I'll go find it and put that in the chat for you guys. Power Apps in the past month or so got the geospatial features went generally available. So this is pretty exciting, having the Azure Map component. It lets you create mobile apps that can interact with location data, and you can drop a pin and do things like that. And the address input lets you search addresses and get all the details about that location. So those are services that are built in now. And they also added new AI builder capabilities. Unfortunately, this is a little bit expensive to just jump into, so I haven't tried it. But it does look cool, the different AI things you can add into your apps and flows. But I've not gotten into it yet. But they added some new AI builder features that are around prediction that are generally available. And then in the Power Automate world, they renamed the flows. So the traditional Power Automate service is now called a cloud flow. And then the new robotic process automation, they had called it UI flows, but now it's called desktop flows. They put out a monthly update to their Power Automate desktop, which you can read on their blog. I have also not tried that yet, but would love to. And then they also have 11 new connectors. So they're always adding different services you can connect to that makes it easy to retrieve and send data to. So we do have a kind of a self-motivated self-participation boot camp that we do together. If you want to learn some of these things that I just mentioned, I'm going to pull up a PDF real quick. So some of you have opted in to be a part of a boot camp where you can learn different things and earn badges. So we're trying to build some community around what a lot of people come to this group to do, which is to learn and to apply these things in their job. So if you're interested, you can message me, send me your email address, and I'll add you to the group. But basically, we have just badges for being a part of the group, our meetup, badges for completing different self-directed trainings. And so we have a list of trainings we recommend. And then if you apply this at your job, we have project completion badges that range from Excel, Power BI to Power Apps and Power Automate. And then we have pro badges. If you want to review someone's project, you can get a badge. And I do have someone right now that has a project they'd like to review. So if you're interested, let me know if you'd like to earn that pro badge. So anyway, I just thought I'd quickly highlight that. And if you're interested in being a part, email me your email address and that you'd like to be a part of it. So that's all I have as far as introductions. I'm going to turn it over to Meagan to begin her presentation. And again, she'd love for us to be interactive. And so turn on your video, your mic, and ask a question or use the chat. And thank you so much for joining us, Meagan. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. One moment while I get my screen shared. All right, we can see my screen and me and hear me. Yes?
Yep.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so today we're going to talk about practical application of storytelling in Power BI. And you'll see probably throughout this presentation that I'm not an overly flowery person, but storytelling has this kind of sacred space in data visualization, but we don't break it down a lot to talk about what does it really mean and how do you actually do it. So that's what inspired this presentation. For those who don't know me, my name is Meagan Longoria. I live in Denver. I blog at datasavvy.me. I tweet a lot. It's probably half data and a good portion of dogs. I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MVP, and I work for a consulting company called Denny Cherry Associates Consulting. I do a lot of Power BI work as well as just Azure Data Platform stuff in general. And I'm also one of the organizers of the Power BI version of Workout Wednesday, which I asked if I could plug real quick. For those who haven't heard about it, Workout Wednesday is a weekly challenge, and it started in the Tableau community, but there is now a Power BI version. So every week there is a challenge that gets published really on our Tuesday so that everybody has Wednesday across the world to do it. And so we give you kind of requirements and the data set to use. And then we post a solution video so that you can see how your work compared to kind of what we were expecting. We're in the third week. You can do these whenever, you don't have to do them on Wednesday, but they've turned out to be a lot of fun. So you're only 3 behind if you want to join, and you can kind of pick and choose which weeks you want to participate. There's nothing that says you have to do it every week. But this is a new initiative this year to increase conversation about data visualization in Power BI. We get lots of DAX and Power Query stuff going on, and you'll see some DAX and Power Query in some of the challenges, but this is largely focused on data viz. So I'm excited that it's started and it's got a pretty good reception, and you can see lots of tweets about it if you go to the WOW 2021 hashtag. So sorry, thank you for letting me plug that real quick. Sorry, go ahead.
What kind of dogs?
I will show you. I have a report about my dog.
All right, thanks.
I like things to be interactive. So I'm going to ask you to share your thoughts. I promise it's brief. It's only 2 questions. If you go to slido.com and enter this number or use this URL, once I go to the next slide, a question will pop up. Or you can take a picture of the QR code. It works fine on mobile. And so the question is, what do you consider to be the essential elements of a story? So again, just go to slido.com, number 10391. And at this point, you should be able to enter things into the poll. And we will see them pop up. Maybe. Yeah, there we go. So we need a hero in a story, a plot, a solution. Someone's been reading my slides, beginning, middle, and end. We'll let a couple more responses come through. Empathy. All right. So from your quick responses, we know there's kind of a shape to a story, a beginning, middle, and end, that there's some kind of problem that needs to be addressed or resolved in some way. So here's what I think are the important elements of a story. First, we have context. That's our setting. We need to set the stage, explain the environment, the surroundings, any necessary backstory. Then we have characters, the individuals who the story is about. And there's usually a main character. Some of you said hero earlier, so that's pretty right on, who determines the plot and how that develops. And the next is problems or conflict. The plot of the story is centered around some problem that the characters need to attempt to solve to resolve that problem. People love a good conflict. That's why we watch a lot of TV. We get involved in all that, and we like to see how things work out. If we have problems, we need a resolution. So our solutions, we get invested and we want to know, how things worked out from the problem that the main characters faced. And then the fifth element is emotion. We get invested. And there's a quote from Will Storr that says, "The story is a description of something happening that contains some form of sensation or drama. It is, in other words, an explanation of cause and effect that is soaked in emotion." It's this emotion that's crucial to a story. They make you feel, and that feeling is what causes you to remember and potentially act on the lessons of the story. So that's what I consider the 5 main elements of any story. Outside of data viz, when you tell your kids a story at night, you probably have these 5 elements to make it interesting and memorable. In addition to those familiar elements, we have a structure. It's a very recognizable structure, and sometimes the labels we put on it change, but it often takes the form we see here: beginning, middle, and end. But it could also be recognized as situation, conflict, and resolution. In the beginning, we set our context and we introduce our characters. Then we introduce conflict and we build it up to a climax before we get to the resolution, where the conflict is solved and we all live happily ever after, at least in some stories. So another common structure for a story, especially in data storytelling, is this using the middle of the story to explain what could be, and then contrasting that with how things are. For example, when I was in college, I studied international business with minors in computer science and Spanish, and Latin American studies as well. I did my study abroad, which was required for my major, in Viña del Mar, Chile, and I always kind of wanted to live in Central or South America, for a while at least. But life took other interesting twists, and I currently live in Denver. But sometimes I wonder what could have been. I think about what could be if I went today. And one of my favorite animals is the capybara. I don't know if y'all are familiar with those. They are super chill. They are large rodents related to guinea pigs and chinchillas, but they can be 4 feet long and 2 feet tall. But they're very social. And there's a whole subreddit called Critters on Capybaras, where you can see all kinds of animals hanging out with capybaras. So my capybara has a bird, but there's all kinds of things. So I dream of a farm in South America where I raise capybaras. But right now I live in Denver and I raise a cranky bulldog. And I would live in a hut and enjoy being close to nature. But right now I own a townhome in Denver that requires cleaning and maintenance and a nice big mortgage payment. Capybaras are so chill and social, but life in Denver is full of stress, and I barely know my neighbors. So as soon as we get through this pandemic, I should sell my house, move to South America, and start a capybara farm. Then I could live free from super expensive housing, spend more time outdoors, and be less stressed. And of course, just be friends with a capybara. So that's how this structure works. We just do this, here's how things are, here's what they could be, but remember, here's how things are. And we go back and forth a couple times. So we get this call to adventure. Imagine this great thing that you don't have, and then call to action towards the end to say, here's how you get that thing. So there's a lot of this in persuasive storytelling, which is often a theme of data visualization as well. So why do we even talk about storytelling with data? First, the stories have a logical structure, as we just saw. We present background and characters and conflict and then resolution. You get the information you need and then you move to the next step in the story. It's easy to follow. Every culture has stories. We're familiar with how they go. Even young children can make up stories. And then they're engaging. We get wrapped up in a story because we love a good conflict and it's satisfying to see the conclusion. The emotion that I mentioned earlier gets us caught up in the story, and it also makes it memorable. There's probably some stories you remember from your childhood to this day. I could tell you the story of the 3 Little Pigs, even though I haven't read it or heard it in years. So this is our last Slido thing. So the same link and the same number works, but I want you to be honest because I have a theory and I've done this presentation a couple times and so far it has matched with my theory. So when I go to the next slide, you'll be able to answer the question, have you recently told a story with data in Power BI? And so I put a time limit on this in the last 6 months. So in the last 6 months, have you really made a report that told a story? Answers are coming in, and so far it's looking about like I expect. We'll wait for maybe, I think we had 18 responders last time, so let's see if we can get 18 responses here. All right. So this is about what I figured, that the majority would say no, and that some people would be unsure. So what I'm going to do next is help dispel the rumors about what a story really is and when and why we might need one. There is a great series of blog posts by John Schwabish over at PolicyViz, and he calls it What is Story? And he examines all of this. And what he says is that while many of us use that word story over and over again as we make our graphs and visualizations, I think we need to be more careful with that word and only use it when appropriate, when we're getting people to feel deeply, and when we're leading them to a meaningful climax. If you are familiar with Nightingale, it's on Medium, I believe. It's the blog from the Data Visualization Society. And Joshua Smith won a Tableau contest, and he had his viz highly rated in the category of storytelling. And then he came out with this post and said, you know, I don't think I was telling a story. I realized based on the criteria, I did pretty well. But I need you to know that it's important to highlight that a visualization isn't more or less powerful, beautiful, or important because it does or doesn't tell a story. So you might be sensing my message to you today that not all data visualization is a story. And I see it on a spectrum. And this is pretty similar to how John Schwabish describes it as well. There's a spectrum. On the left is annotation. They're well organized, logical order. A story, on the other hand, has a plot with a climax. It's got emotional engagement, conflict, and characters we get attached to. And in between annotation and story is narration. This is where we kind of just describe what's going on. And we frame our reader's journey. We may not have a true conflict or true emotions, but that doesn't mean that the narration doesn't help. It still humanizes our data visualizations. So if you can get your Power BI report to a story, that's great. But sometimes it's just not. And we have this tendency to do this very dry, sparse reporting that's barely an annotation. Moving your report further to the right on the spectrum humanizes your topic and it makes it more relatable and memorable. So we can still take advantage of some of the benefits of story without having to go full on story. So a lot of the time, what we're aiming for is kind of that happy medium of narration. That's still good, and it's still better than probably the average report that I see. So if you see people raving about storytelling, and you're kind of feeling a bit puzzled because you look at your reports and you're like, I don't think I'm telling a story, you can let yourself off the hook because not everything is a story, and that's okay. But just because we don't necessarily have a true story doesn't mean we just throw stuff on the page and call it good. We still need things to be organized in a purposeful way. Think about if you've seen Lord of the Rings, there is this these tweets that it was tell a story. It was essentially like summarize a story poorly. And so somebody tweeted about Lord of the Rings, and Lord of the Rings is group spends 9 hours returning jewelry. Accurate, but it wouldn't be so epic if that's all it was, because they have a ton of storytelling. And so that's kind of what we're aiming for. Yes, it is an accurate summary, but we're trying to humanize it and make it memorable. So we want to make sure that we have the necessary context and our information organized coherently to deliver meaning to people. A lot of people get into Power BI from the tech industry or from doing more just straight analysis work. And so when we're really trying to do this narrative or story thing, we need to use different skills than maybe what we were taught. No one teaches this much in business analyst class up until just recently. So the first thing I want to address is, what if I don't have a story? I just have a report with some annotation. And my response is that no matter how much story you really have, you always have a message. That's your key takeaway, your so what. When you're designing, you need to define your message first before anything hits the page. For the entire report, tell me in 1 to 2 sentences why this report exists and what should your reader get out of it. Then I add visuals. I need to be able to explain the visual, each one, and how it relates to my overall message. If I can't explain how the visual supports my report's message, I probably have the wrong visual. I need to consider removing it or replacing it with something else. And at this level, it's kind of a whiteboard or a sticky note activity. I used to do a pre-con back when we had in-person events, and I would actually give people sticky notes and have them make a storyboard out. And then we would talk about what chart types we might want to use and all that. But this is where I think a lot of people go wrong, in that they can't articulate their message. So let's take a look at a visualization that I think does a great job with defining a message and purposefully designing to support that message. I asked the author if I could use this because I think it clearly articulates a message. And her message is, I'll zoom in on this a little bit. She wanted to know if a larger production budget for a movie is more likely to garner an Oscar nomination. And the answer was no. So first, she has this very clear descriptive title in which she actually states the conclusion that she has drawn after analyzing the data. Then she has some nice explanatory text that provides supplementary information in support of answering that initial question of, does production budget relate to Oscar nominations? And then she has charts that clearly support the message. On each side here, we can see that. So on the left is the number of Oscar nominations that each movie got. And on the right is the production budget for the movie. So everything on the page can be easily justified for supporting the message. Oh, I forgot my arrows. So that visualization was pretty easy because the author was working with static data. She had her conclusion made before she made the visualization. But a lot of Power BI reports in our organizations are dynamic, and the data is set to refresh on a schedule. So we can't know that sales are up this quarter because the numbers are changing. When that happens, we have to change how we approach that design. Whereas with explanatory data visualization, the report creator takes on most of the responsibility for telling the story or the message. Exploratory, when we don't have our numbers yet, shifts some of that effort to the report consumer. So we have a sort of vague plot without the details of specific numbers. And we provide interactive controls to help the user focus on the slice that they care about, that's most relevant to them. And we provide signals, things like KPIs, gauges, to tell our report consumer how things are going. And then we provide context. This is our background information, things the report consumer needs in order to create their own conclusions and build their own story. So this is probably your typical corporate Power BI report with scheduled refresh, numbers that change, daily or weekly. People don't often address this. When we talk about story, we're like, yeah, here's all this data that doesn't change anymore, and here's what you do. If you're doing this kind of thing with this dynamic data, it's called story forming. I interviewed Andy Kirk from Visualizing Data about this, and that's where the term came from. That's his term. And basically the change is kind of just in how you think about it. So you don't know the answer to your question, but you know the question you want to ask. Instead of saying bicycle sales are up year over year, we might just know that we want to show year over year sales by product category. Even with dynamic data, though, we can still go for a bit of story. In Power BI, this might mean using DAX formulas to populate titles and text explanations with conditional formatting. This could be using the SMART narrative, which I'll show you in a minute, or the enlightened data story custom visual. So it's as if we're telling the story, but the plot details are all data-driven. We could also add in a bit of machine learning for forecasting or clustering, just to help pick out important data points and trends. So I'm going to show you kind of a fairly standard Power BI report and talk about how this is used for story forming. This is a report that I made a couple years ago now that is about the questions that people ask on Stack Overflow related to Power BI. So I have the cards and waffle charts and my table that's formatted to be sort of a heat map. I've got slicers at the top. Those are my interactive controls. Sorry, the waffle charts are the signal, as well as my heat map is also a sort of a signal. And then I have line charts that provide additional information to understand more context. So this report organizes data in a pretty logical order. First, I tell you, we're looking at Power BI questions on Stack Overflow. It's right in my title. Then I tell you there were 4,361 total questions asked by about 2,800 different users. Those questions received 4,287 answers, which is about one answer per question. And most questions are answered within a day. Power BI questions don't get a lot of upvotes or downvotes, so the question score average is pretty close to 0. We can read on and see that 77% of questions get answered. And users aren't great about marking things as being answered, as basically marking the answers as being accepted. And very few questions are ever marked as closed because they didn't meet the site's quality requirements for the question. And then I can go on to see how the number of questions asked has increased over time in this line chart. And we can see that people go back and reference even older questions. And the most popular topic is by far DAX. So I deliberately set some context with summary stats to help you know whether you might want to use Stack Overflow to learn about Power BI or ask questions when you're stuck. Once we get through the summary stats, I provided a bit more context and then showed you what topics have good participation. Right now, that's DAX, but that could change over time. So I'm going to pull up a quick, this is the Power BI report from the September release that the product team puts out, just so I can show you the SMART narrative. So the SMART narrative creates this text on its own, and this one is done for the whole page. It looks at all the charts on the page and then puts out what I think are really more annotations. So we can see revenue and visits both trended up, and that comes from this website visits and sales chart. We can see that outdoor accounted for 54.67% of sales, which is over here, but they put it in words in addition to you having these charts. You can do this for a whole page, or you can do this for an individual chart. So it's your choice, and it'll just sit on the page. And as your data updates, it will update this text from the smart narrative as well. The other thing that I think is pretty useful, I'm going to open up a report I made a while back. This is just a report about, this is taking the sample data for the HR sample report that comes in Power BI. And we changed up the visuals because we did a makeover on it. Essentially, we weren't happy with what was in there. So what I've done here is I'm going to undo this slicer. And you'll notice not only do my charts change, but my titles, some of them, change over time or change with the data as well. So this active employee count has increased over time is actually a DAX formula. And we don't need to necessarily focus too much on the DAX. Title. So here's an example of where I'm just checking, and this one I'm checking, from the first period that's in the chart to the last, how did it change? Did it go up, down, or remain the same? And so I did similar things for each chart. And that's what each of these, I'll expand this out a little bit, these title measures are. So when we go into a visualization, instead of just typing the title, we use conditional formatting. And so we see there's an FX button there. And you just choose field value, and then you choose your measure. And that's really all there is to that. But it can be really helpful because we saw that the movie's visual earlier where she clearly stated her conclusion in the title and how easy it was to see all the supporting information after you've learned the conclusion. You can do this when things are still dynamic by using conditional formatting and changing your title text. All right, any questions, comments, thoughts so far? We're about to get into the meat of it. Okay, we're going to keep going. So that report had a sense of narrative, but it wasn't quite a story. But regardless of if it's a full story, what we actually do with our visuals and pages to tell a narrative or story is pretty similar. So the thing that helped me most to understand this is a publication from Microsoft Research, and I'm going to pull that up here. And it's called Emerging and Recurring Data-Driven Storytelling Techniques, Analysis of a Curated Collection of Recent Stories. What they do is they took a sample of lots of data-driven stories, and they categorized them. I'm going to make this a little bigger. And they ended up with these 4 categories. And so many stories used lots of different techniques. So within a category, there may be 5 or 6 techniques to achieve that. Some of them used all 4, some of them used only 3, but this is how they looked at it to say there are actual applications, physical things you do in your report to tell a story. It's not this fluffy, floaty thing. We can tell you how this works and how most people are doing it. So reading through this, they pick out some particular visualizations to talk about them as examples, but at the very end, they have their appendix with all of the samples they used. And this is published in 2016, so a couple of things have gone offline, but largely everything is still available. So you can go and read this and read their full explanation of the technique, and then go look at the example visuals. But I'm going to talk you through the 4 categories, and I'll show you one of the examples from the paper, and then one example that I've made in PowerBI. So the first is communicating narrative and explaining data. And that's just interspersing narration or text with visuals. This is pretty typical in news articles. So if we go look at the article that they used as an example, this is a better way to find the best flights and avoid the worst airports. And we see there's a lot of text, and then a news section, a heading, and then there's a chart. And then we have more text and another chart. And that's really all this category of storytelling is: text, chart, text, chart. So my version of this is a story about my dog. Let's go full screen. So I adopted a dog early in the pandemic in April from an animal shelter because my previous dog passed away at the beginning of April. But since she's adopted, I'm not exactly sure what she is. She was listed as a bulldog, but she's not your average English bulldog. So this is my dog, Izzy. She's definitely at least part bulldog, so I think they were right. They just didn't specify more than that because they didn't know. And she has long legs. That's why I know she's not just full English bulldog. And a little bit of a longer snout than the average English bulldog. English bulldogs are brachycephalic, which means they're smushy faced. The distance between like their eyes and their nose is pretty short compared to like a golden retriever. So I thought that Izzy was perhaps mixed with boxer. I sent Izzy's DNA to one of those companies that does that, and it actually came back as 100% Old English Bulldog. And I took a look at the picture and I read up, and I could kind of see it. So I'm going to guess that Izzy is actually an Old English Bulldog. Old English Bulldogs were created in the 70s, kind of as a reaction to what we've done with the English Bulldog. English Bulldogs have a lot of health problems because of the way that they're bred. So there used to be an old English Bulldog back in like the 18th century that was much taller and healthier than the big drooly guy on the bottom left over here. And so this is kind of the foundation for what most Old English Bulldogs are bred as. We get part American Bulldog, part American Pit Bull Terrier, part Bull Mastiff, and about half English Bulldog. So this is my version of that kind of interspersing text with data visualization. In this case, a lot of the data is here's what my dog looks like, but it still counts. The second technique is called linking separated story elements. So we
Meagan, can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah, definitely.
So I was thinking, when I thought about your presentation, I was thinking part of it, and maybe you might get to this, was going to be kind of using Power BI like a PowerPoint where you would tell a story in person and kind of use the bookmarks to make your points. And so, yeah. But I honestly don't have that much opportunity to give those presentations. So actually what you're telling me is more helpful to me, but I didn't know if you were going to include some element of the bookmarks as well.
Yes. This is in the next technique or two, you'll see a lot more things that look like bookmarks and clicking through. So you are right on. This is going to cover that as well as other things.
Sorry for jumping ahead.
No, you're good. So when we link separated story elements, we choose some common thing that makes us know that things are related. We can do this with report themes because that way they set color and font. We can also do this with actions, including go to a bookmark. and buttons and shapes in Power BI. So let's briefly look at the report that is an example. And this is from 2015, and it's about gay rights in the US. And obviously, since 2015, gay marriage has been made legal across the US. So that's the entire red outline has to do with that. So how we read this is we match the color to the topic. So the outside red is about marriage, orange is hospital visits, and they've kind of arranged this somewhat geographically. So here's Tennessee. And in Tennessee, same-sex marriage is allowed, but there are no hospital visitation rights. Adoptions are allowed by same-sex couples. There's no employment protection or housing. There are some laws that address hate crimes. And there's no protection regarding schools. So we get these colors, they label them, and then we scroll down and we can see, oh, here's that same yellow color for hospitalization. And then they break it down just slightly differently by region here. And then we get more information looking through this. So then adoption is still blue. And that's really all it is to linking separated story elements. So I did this in Power BI about my company, the company I work for. I gave everybody a survey to answer to help people get to know us. We're a small consulting company. And we all work from home, and a lot of people know us from Twitter or presentations, that type of thing. So they see us more as people, and I think my company is very good about treating employees as people who are, have personalities and interests and do things outside of work. So I tried to capture that in a Power BI report. I'm going to make this full screen. There we go. So our company is headquartered in California because that's where my boss lives. When the survey was done in 2019, I was the last one to join. And we have a bunch of awards and achievements and all that. We've been working with SQL Server for a very long time. So it was a bookmark because at the time, actually, we're going to go and do this other one. There's a guessing game in there that we're going to skip out on. So if you click to get more information, you can see number of years working with SQL Server, with Azure, with Power BI, how many of us have higher education degrees, and then we can go back. And we can see the same thing with community involvement, and then we have a fun facts section. So amongst all of the employees, there were 7 children, 11 pets. Some people are morning people, some people are night owls. I just like sleep. We're almost evenly split as far as phone OSs. We drink a lot of coffee a day. I'm actually the 1 cup. And before the pandemic, we liked to travel a lot. So people had visited many, many different countries. And a few of us are into cycling, like actually getting on our bike, not just watching it on TV. And other people like motorcycles and going to the shooting range. Most of us prefer dogs, but my boss has bunnies. So you can get to know us. And this is more the style that I think you could give a presentation for, just a little bit more interactive of clicking through and then coming back out. So all of these do something like that. And then I added some extra things where you can go to our blog or tweet at us, that type of thing. And this top part, I actually made this so I could make this for any company. You put in your own survey questions, and then we can pretty easily format this to have themes of your own. So this is the Enlightened Data Story custom visual, and it populates based on the company name that was entered in the survey results. So that's my version of linking separate story elements. Our third technique is enhancing structure and navigation. So this could also be bookmark related. It's usually, this is kind of the more traditional PowerPoint, like click next, do this thing. So you can have next, previous buttons. You can do what's called scrolly telling, which we'll see an example of in a second. Breadcrumbs, menu selections, all of those fall into this category. If you've ever heard kind of the marketing spiel on a Power BI report where we go, it's an app-like experience, meaning we've made something that looks like a web app, that also falls into this. So we're going to look at this Bloomberg article that says Americans are completely addicted to trucks. And this is the scrolly telling thing. So as I scroll, the text changes on the left and the visualization changes on the right. So crossovers have become the new family car. I can hover over a crossover and see, oh, the Honda CR-V is the most popular, Nissan Rogue. And that's how scrolly telling works. So there's no buttons, we're just using our mouse to navigate. My version of that technique in Power BI is this report about Denver traffic. So I wanted to know, what leads to traffic accidents in Denver? You would think it would be weather or when people are driving at night, but it's not really. So we learned that accidents happen most often in the afternoon. Lunchtime accidents are more prevalent than those during morning rush hour. So we can see Friday has the highest number of accidents. Here's our hours. And all I did was use buttons for navigation. So this page starts us off by analyzing it over time, either day, hour, or month. We could also look at it by location. So I have a map that shows where most accidents occur. And it turns out just in really busy highway interchanges, we have Highway I-70 and I-25 that intersect, and that's where a lot of stuff happens. And then I looked at driving conditions. So is it because the road is slick in the middle of winter? Actually, no. More accidents happen when it's just straight, not even hilly, dry conditions in daylight. And it's really just because everybody is a bad driver here. They're following too closely, they're driving carelessly. The year that I moved out here, somebody rear-ended my car and totaled it because she wasn't paying attention. There's just like random stop and go traffic on the highway. So this is the controlled navigation where I give them buttons, and there's kind of a specified order because of the way in which I organize the buttons. I could have also done like a next button and a back button, as we saw earlier. So my earlier report about my company also used some elements of this as well.
I have a question on that.
Sure.
With having just the buttons, are you also doing it through drill throughs?
You could, absolutely.
And would it go to those other buttons as the drill through, or?
I'm not using drill through in that report, but you could. You would just
find drill throughs would be better for the storytelling concept, or a bookmark concept would be better?
That's probably an it depends.
Okay.
Depends on what you're going for and what data you have. Either is perfectly valid. It depends on if you have something to drill through or if you're changing subjects. Like here, I'm changing from time to location to driving conditions, and I'm not really doing the intersection of those things. So bookmarks and just general navigation might be better here. But if I were analyzing this data and I really wanted to talk about, rush hour traffic being a thing, and then look at that specifically by drilling through from here, that could have been equally valid. It just depends on the message, the overall high level story that you're going for. But drill throughs could have absolutely been part of this.
Okay.
All right, we're on our last technique. So this one is just called providing controlled exploration, meaning we let users poke around a little bit but we limit what they can do. And that example is about Oscars. So they go through in this viz several questions they're trying to answer with data, and we can see, are these directors in their prime? When did these directors get their Oscar according to kind of their timeline of when they were active? And then at the very bottom, there's this explore the data. So when I click on explore the data, I can see winners, and let's do, somebody give me a director that they're pretty sure has won an Oscar. You can either put it in chat or unmute.
Quentin Tarantino. Quentin Tarantino.
See how well I spell. It might not have been in here yet. Let's just look at Peter Jackson. So I can filter by director if I can actually spell their name correctly. I can add or remove the IMDb rating. I can hover over a bar and get the title, how old the director was at that time, the year, and the IMDb rating for that specific movie. So that's what we mean by controlled exploration. And there actually was this thing at the end of that Bloomberg auto sales is also controlled exploration. So I could group by different things. Maybe I want to see by brand, and then do gainers and losers. So I drive, oh, I'm not in here. There it is. I drive a Mazda CX-5. So I'm in this other group. So it depends on what people are curious about. We give them some parameters they can change, but they can't just, change the whole visualization. So my controlled exploration is about database management. I have something similar that I put in place for a client who's kind of the ISV, meaning they have one database per customer. So they need to manage a lot of them. So I'm pulling data from Azure Log Analytics, as well as the query store in SQL database, and some other metrics like storage. And they can change only a few things. They can change this database that I used as my sample data isn't active very much anymore, so I don't have any queries, but they can go and look at logins. There's 11 databases in this scrubbed data. They can ask a Q&A question, but it's kind of limited. So this is what they get instead of just anything. So I have an explore metrics button, which for some reason is not clicking. So we're just going to go to it. That seems easier. And here's where the controlled exploration really comes in. So maybe I would like, I'd have to choose a server that actually has data. There we go. And I want to see storage percent. They're using next to none of their storage. I could also see this by bytes instead of percentage. And depending, some of these are serverless databases, so they're not always awake. Yeah, that one's been asleep for a while. But they only get to choose from these metrics, from these databases, and what metric they would like to see. So that's kind of the controlled part. Yeah, you get to change this around, but it'll always be a line chart and it will always be from these parameters. So let's wrap up. We like stories because they are engaging and memorable, but not everything is a story. So if you were feeling like, I don't know how to tell stories, maybe that's because you're actually really just going for a narrative, and that's okay. Most reports can be humanized more. They don't have to be so technical and wordless. We can be much more explanatory in the way that we design. So we want to lean more towards narrative than annotation. And regardless of if you have a true story or not, you can use the techniques explained in that research paper. So that was communicating narrative and explaining data. That was the dog report where we interspersed text and data visualization. Linking separate story elements. That was the DCAC about my company report where I used color. So the fun stuff was gray, and then we went to the next page with the fun stuff detail, and it was also gray. Enhancing structure and navigation was the app-like experience about Denver traffic, where we can do, next, previous, or any kind of menu to make that work. And then providing controlled exploration. That's we give certain parameters to let users change the query, but they can't change everything. So hopefully that helps you get an idea of how to actually tell a story. Use your bookmarks, use color to do it. And here's what you're going for. And that white paper will give you lots of examples to try to imitate. Any final thoughts, questions?
That was great, Megan. I took a whole page of notes here. So I'm going to be using this on my next dashboard. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Megan? Megan, ever since bookmarks. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sekou.
I was gonna say, Megan, how long you been like on the front end data viz side of things, like with the storytelling concept?
I didn't really get into storytelling until probably 3 or 4 years ago. But I've been doing data viz work since 2011, 2012.
Cool.
Megan, awesome presentation. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, thanks for having me. This was fun. Oh, there's a couple questions that people are asking. Hold on. Hopefully it's okay to read this one out loud because I think it's a great question. With controlled exploration, are you basically making your report a Baskin-Robbins type of report? Choose your flavor. Yeah, I think you could say that. That's a pretty good description. So you're letting people choose what's interesting or important to them and letting them zero in on that instead of you deciding for them what's interesting. Yeah, I like that. I might have to steal that explanation. All right, well, that wraps it up. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Megan. Thanks everybody for joining. Have a great day. See you next month.